Mark unlocked the front door while Sarah waited outside with Oliver bundled in her arms. They had planned this moment carefully based on advice from Dr. Chen. Mark would greet Atlas first and let him burn off some excited energy before meeting the baby. As the door opened, they heard the familiar sound of Atlas's paws scrambling across the hardwood floor. The big dog rushed to Mark, his tail wagging so hard his entire back half moved with it. Mark knelt down and accepted the enthusiastic greeting, rubbing Atlas's ears and speaking to him in the calm voice he always used. After a few minutes of attention, Atlas seemed to settle. His nose lifted and twitched. He could smell something new, something that made him curious and alert. Mark stood up and walked back to the doorway where Sarah stood. She had positioned herself so Atlas could see her, but kept Oliver turned slightly away. The dog approached slowly, his movements more cautious than Mark had ever seen. There was no jumping or barking. Atlas simply walked forward with his head slightly lowered, his eyes fixed on the small bundle in Sarah's arms. Sarah spoke softly to Atlas, using the same gentle tone she had used throughout her pregnancy. She told him what a good boy he was and how proud she felt of him. Then very carefully she lowered herself to sit on the bottom step of their porch. Mark sat beside her, his hand resting on Atlas's back. Sarah adjusted Oliver so the dog could catch his scent. Atlas stretched his neck forward and sniffed delicately at the blanket. His large black nose moved across the fabric, taking in every detail of this new family member. What happened next brought tears to both parents' eyes. Atlas let out a soft whine and gently licked Oliver's tiny hand that had escaped from the blanket. The baby's fingers were so small compared to the dog's massive head. Atlas then lay down right there on the porch, positioning himself in front of Sarah's feet. He rested his chin on his paws but kept his eyes open. Watching Oliver with an intensity that spoke of instant devotion, Mark squeezed Sarah's hand. Their worry began to melt away. They moved inside slowly, with Atlas following close behind. The dog maintained a respectful distance but never took his eyes off Oliver. When Sarah sat in the rocking chair in the nursery to feed the baby, Atlas positioned himself by the door. When Mark changed Oliver's diaper for the first time at home, fumbling with the tiny tabs and trying not to get sprayed, Atlas sat nearby and watched the entire process with what Sarah swore was an amused expression. That first night home was difficult. Oliver cried every 2 hours and Sarah stumbled through the darkness feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. Each time she got up to tend to the baby, she found Atlas already awake and alert. The dog would follow her to the nursery and wait patiently while she fed Oliver or changed him. His presence was comforting during those long, lonely hours when the rest of the world slept. Sarah found herself talking to Atlas, telling him about her fears and her joy, and the dog seemed to understand every word. The next few weeks brought a new rhythm to the household. Sarah's mother came to visit and help out. She arrived with casseroles and opinions, many of which involved keeping Atlas away from the baby. She would shoo the dog out of rooms and close doors to separate him from Oliver. Sarah noticed that Atlas would simply wait outside whatever room Oliver was in. The dog never scratched at doors or barked. He just waited with the patience of a saint. Eventually, even Sarah's mother softened. She watched Atlas's gentle behavior and admitted she might have been wrong about him. Mark returned to work after 2 weeks, leaving Sarah alone with Oliver and Atlas during the day. She worried about managing everything by herself, but Atlas seemed to sense her stress. The dog stayed close but not too close. He learned quickly which areas were off-limits and which behaviors earned praise. When Sarah put Oliver down for naps, Atlas would settle nearby, creating an unofficial guard post. If Sarah needed to run to the bathroom or grab something from another room, she found she could trust Atlas to alert her if Oliver stirred. One afternoon, Sarah put Oliver in his swing while she folded laundry. The baby was content, watching the mobile spin above him. Sarah got absorbed in matching tiny socks when suddenly Atlas barked. It was sharp and urgent, completely different from his normal sounds. Sarah dropped the laundry and rushed over. Oliver had spit up and the liquid was pooling near his face. Sarah quickly picked him up and cleaned him, her heart racing. If he had been lying flat, he might have choked. Atlas had noticed before she did. From that moment, Sarah looked at the dog differently. He wasn't just their pet anymore. He was Oliver's protector. Friends started visiting to meet the baby. Some brought gifts, others brought food. All of them brought opinions about the massive dog who seemed permanently stationed near the infant. Some visitors were nervous around Atlas despite his calm demeanor. Sarah's friend Jessica refused to hold Oliver while the dog was in the room. Mark's co-worker actually suggested they keep Atlas locked in the basement when people came over. But Sarah and Mark stood firm. Atlas had earned his place in their family and they trusted him completely. The pediatrician appointments became easier with Atlas around. Sarah dreaded taking Oliver out at first, loading the car seat, remembering the diaper bag, timing it between feedings, all of it felt overwhelming. But when they returned home, Atlas would be waiting at the door, his tail wagging with relief at their return. Sarah realized the dog gave her confidence. Knowing he would be there when they got home made leaving feel less scary. Atlas became her anchor in the storm of new motherhood. The Thompson family lived in a quiet neighborhood where maple trees lined the streets and children played until the streetlights came on. Sarah and Mark Thompson had been married for 5 years when they decided to expand their family. They already had one member who brought them endless joy, a massive German shepherd named Atlas. The dog weighed nearly 90 pounds and stood tall enough that his head reached Sarah's waist when he sat beside her. His coat was thick and golden brown with black markings that made him look noble and strong. Atlas had been with them since he was a puppy, and Mark often joked that he was their practice child. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, the couple felt a mix of excitement and worry. They loved Atlas deeply, but they had heard countless stories about dogs becoming jealous or aggressive when a new baby arrived. Their friends and family members shared warnings and cautionary tales. Sarah's mother insisted they should rehome the dog before the baby came. Mark's brother told them about a colleague whose dog had to be given away after it snapped at their newborn. The stories kept coming, each one more frightening than the last. Despite the warnings, Sarah and Mark couldn't imagine their lives without Atlas. The dog had been their companion through difficult times. When Sarah lost her job 2 years earlier, Atlas seemed to sense her sadness and stayed by her side every day. When Mark's father passed away, the dog sat quietly at his feet during the long, tearful nights. Atlas was more than a pet. He was family. They decided to keep him and prepare him as best they could for the arrival of the baby. Sarah started researching how to introduce dogs to newborns. She read books, watched videos, and consulted with their veterinarian. Dr. Chen, who had treated Atlas since he was a puppy, assured them that German shepherds were naturally protective and loyal. He explained that with proper preparation, Atlas would likely become the baby's guardian rather than a threat. The vet suggested playing recordings of baby sounds around Atlas and letting him smell baby products like lotion and powder. Sarah followed every recommendation carefully. As Sarah's belly grew larger, something remarkable began to happen. Atlas became increasingly gentle around her. The dog who used to jump and play roughly now moved carefully when Sarah was nearby. He would rest his large head on her lap and seem to listen when she talked to him about the baby. Mark watched in amazement as Atlas positioned himself between Sarah and strangers whenever they went for walks. The dog's protective instincts were clearly emerging. During the final month of pregnancy, Sarah set up the nursery. She painted the walls a soft yellow and assembled a white crib that Mark had spent hours putting together. She washed tiny clothes and folded them into drawers. She arranged stuffed animals on shelves and hung a mobile above the crib that played gentle lullabies. Throughout all of this, Atlas watched from the doorway. He never entered the room without permission, but his curious eyes followed every movement. Sarah would call him in occasionally and let him sniff the new items, always speaking softly and praising him for his calm behavior. The day Sarah went into labor arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Her water broke while she was making breakfast, and Mark rushed around the house gathering bags and checking lists. Atlas knew something important was happening. He paced near the front door and whined softly. As Sarah and Mark left for the hospital, they arranged for their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, to check on Atlas throughout the day. The elderly woman had known Atlas since he was a puppy and loved him like her own. 18 hours later, baby Oliver was born. He weighed 7 pounds and had a full head of dark hair. Sarah cried tears of joy as she held her son for the first time. Mark called everyone they knew to share the news. But as the excitement settled, both parents felt a flutter of anxiety about bringing Oliver home to meet Atlas. Would the dog accept this tiny, crying stranger? Would all their preparation be enough? These questions kept them awake even as exhaustion pulled at them. 3 days later, they brought Oliver home. Mrs. Rodriguez had kept Atlas company and reported that he had been restless, sleeping by the front door most of the time. She said it seemed like he was waiting for his family to return. As Mark pulled the car into the driveway, Sarah held Oliver close and whispered a quiet prayer. Mark helped her out of the car and they stood together for a moment, looking at their house where Atlas waited inside. This moment would change everything. When Oliver turned 2 months old, Sarah decided to take him for a walk in the neighborhood. She had barely left the house except for doctor visits and the spring weather called to her. She strapped Oliver into the stroller and attached Atlas's leash. The moment they stepped outside, Atlas moved into a different mode. His posture changed. He walked slightly ahead of the stroller, his head turning left and right, scanning everything. When other people approached on the sidewalk, Atlas positioned himself between them and the stroller. He never growled or showed aggression, but his body language sent a clear message. This baby was under his protection. Mrs. Rodriguez waved from her garden and came over to see how big Oliver had gotten. She had been checking on the family regularly, bringing meals and offering to watch the baby when Sarah needed a shower or nap. As she cooed over Oliver, Atlas remained alert but allowed her close. Sarah realized the dog had learned to recognize who was safe and who required monitoring. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed too, and remarked that she had never seen such devotion from any animal. She told Sarah about her own children and how she wished they'd had a dog like Atlas when they were small. The walks became a daily routine. Sarah needed the fresh air and movement. The baby weight was slowly coming off, but more importantly, getting outside helped her feel less trapped. Atlas seemed to live for these walks. His excitement built as soon as Sarah started preparing the stroller. The dog would fetch his own leash and wait by the door, his entire body quivering with anticipation. On the walk, Sarah talked to both Atlas and Oliver, narrating everything they saw. The yellow house with the rose garden, the corner store with the friendly owner, the park where older kids played basketball. Atlas listened to everything, his ears swiveling to catch every word. One morning during their walk, a loose dog appeared from behind a parked car. It was a medium-sized mixed breed, barking aggressively and running toward them. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She instinctively pulled the stroller closer. But Atlas was already moving. He stepped directly into the other dog's path, making himself as large as possible. His hackles raised and he let out a deep, warning bark that Sarah had never heard before. The sound was primal and fierce. The other dog stopped immediately, reconsidered its approach, and ran off in the opposite direction. Atlas watched until it was completely gone, then turned back to the stroller and gently nudged it with his nose as if checking that Oliver was okay. Sarah's hands shook as she processed what had happened. That other dog could have reached the stroller in seconds. She bent down and hugged Atlas, tears streaming down her face. The dog licked her cheek and wagged his tail, already back to his normal, gentle self. That evening when Mark came home, Sarah told him the whole story. Mark sat down heavily on the couch and looked at Atlas with new respect. They both understood now that their decision to keep Atlas wasn't just about loyalty to their pet. It was about giving Oliver a guardian who would lay down his life without hesitation. As Oliver grew, so did the bond between baby and dog. At 3 months, Oliver started noticing Atlas more. His eyes would follow the dog around the room. When Atlas walked past, Oliver's legs would kick with excitement. Sarah caught these moments on her phone, building a collection of photos and videos that showed their growing connection. She posted some on social media and the responses were overwhelming. Friends, family, and even strangers commented about how beautiful the relationship was. Some shared their own stories of protective dogs. Others admitted they had been wrong to judge Sarah and Mark for keeping a large dog around their newborn. The sleepless nights continued, but they became more bearable with Atlas's help. The dog seemed to have an internal alarm that matched Oliver's schedule. He would wake moments before Oliver cried, alerting Sarah so she could prepare. This meant she often got to Oliver before he fully woke, making it easier to soothe him back to sleep. Mark started calling Atlas their baby monitor. The expensive electronic monitor they had registered for sat unused in a drawer because Atlas was far more reliable. When Oliver was 4 months old, Sarah's parents came to visit for a week. Her father, a stern man who had never been fond of large dogs, watched Atlas carefully. He made comments about the dog's size and questioned whether it was safe to have him so close to Oliver. Sarah bit her tongue and let her father observe. By the 3rd day, something changed. Her father was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper when Oliver started fussing in his bouncer. Before Sarah could get up from where she was cooking dinner, Atlas walked over to the bouncer and gently rocked it with his nose. Oliver calmed immediately, fascinated by the dog's face so close to his own. Sarah's father lowered his newspaper and watched in silence. That evening he pulled Sarah aside and apologized. He said he had never seen anything like the relationship between Atlas and Oliver, and he was sorry for doubting her judgment. The changing table became another place where Atlas stationed himself. Every diaper change, every outfit switch, every bedtime routine involved the dog's watchful presence. Oliver began to expect it. If Atlas wasn't there, Oliver would crane his neck looking for him. The baby was developing an attachment to his furry protector. Sarah researched whether this was healthy and found countless articles about the benefits of children growing up with dogs. They learned empathy earlier, had stronger immune systems, and felt more secure. Everything she read confirmed what she was seeing with her own eyes. As spring turned to summer, the days grew longer and warmer. Sarah would spread a blanket in the backyard and let Oliver have tummy time on the grass. Atlas would lie beside him, creating a living barrier between the baby and the rest of the world. Butterflies would land on Atlas's back and Oliver would stare in wonder. Birds would sing from the trees and Atlas's ears would perk up, but he never moved from his post. Neighbors began to comment on the scene. The Johnsons from across the street said it looked like a painting. The Martins next door took photos to show their grown children. Mark started working on a project in the garage during weekends, building furniture for Oliver's room as he grew. Sarah would bring the baby monitor outside and let Oliver nap in his stroller in the shade. Atlas never left the stroller's side. Even when Mark called him over, or when the neighborhood kids invited him to play, Atlas stayed put. His dedication was absolute. Sarah thought about all the warnings they had received before Oliver was born. Every single person who had told them to get rid of Atlas had been wrong. The dog they worried might hurt their baby had become his most devoted guardian. Oliver's 6-month checkup brought exciting news. The pediatrician said he was developing perfectly and could start trying solid foods. Sarah felt both thrilled and nervous about this new milestone. She set up a high chair in the kitchen and prepared for the messy adventure ahead. The first food was rice cereal mixed with breast milk. Oliver's face scrunched up at the unfamiliar texture, and most of it ended up on his chin and bib. But Atlas discovered a new favorite activity. The dog positioned himself under the high chair, ready to clean up anything that fell. Mark laughed and said they might never need to sweep the kitchen floor again. The mess during feeding times was incredible. Sweet potatoes ended up in Oliver's hair. Mashed bananas decorated the high chair tray like abstract art. Pureed peas somehow landed on the wall 3 feet away. Through it all, Atlas remained patient and helpful. He never jumped up or begged, but he thoroughly cleaned the floor after each meal. Sarah appreciated the help, but she also noticed something else. Oliver had started reaching down from his high chair, trying to touch Atlas's head. The baby would squeal with delight when his tiny fingers made contact with the dog's soft fur. As the months passed, Oliver became more mobile. He learned to roll over, and Atlas would watch with what Sarah swore was pride in his eyes. When Oliver started trying to crawl, pushing himself up on shaky arms, Atlas would lie down nearby as if showing him how it was done. The baby would rock back and forth, determined to move forward, and Atlas would wait patiently. The day Oliver finally crawled for the first time, he crawled directly to Atlas. Sarah captured the moment on video, tears running down her face as Oliver reached the dog and grabbed a handful of fur. Atlas didn't flinch. He simply turned his head and gently licked Oliver's face, making the baby giggle uncontrollably. The house became a constant obstacle course of baby gates and safety measures. Sarah and Mark baby-proofed every corner, every outlet, every sharp edge, but their biggest safety measure was Atlas himself. The dog seemed to understand which objects were dangerous for Oliver. When the baby crawled toward the fireplace, Atlas would position himself in the way. When Oliver headed for the stairs, Atlas would use his body to redirect the baby toward safer areas. Mark joked that they should have named him Guardian instead of Atlas because he took his job so seriously. Oliver's first word came at 9 months old, and it surprised everyone. Sarah expected Mama or Dada, but instead Oliver looked directly at Atlas and said something that sounded remarkably like "at." Sarah called Mark at work immediately. That evening, they tried over and over to get Oliver to repeat it, and he did, each time looking at the dog. Mark recorded it and sent it to everyone they knew. Sarah's mother called and admitted with emotion in her voice that she had been completely wrong about Atlas. She said watching the bond between dog and baby had changed her mind about many things. The seasons changed, and winter arrived. Oliver's first Christmas was magical. Sarah decorated every surface of the house with lights and garland. They put up a tree in the corner of the living room, and Oliver was mesmerized by the twinkling lights. But the tree presented a problem. Oliver kept trying to crawl toward it and grab at the low-hanging ornaments. Sarah and Mark tried blocking it with furniture, but Oliver was determined. Then Atlas took matters into his own paws. The dog positioned himself in front of the tree and stayed there whenever Oliver was in the room. If the baby tried to get past, Atlas would gently redirect him with his body. Not once did he growl or snap. He simply made himself an immovable barrier. Christmas morning brought new toys and wrapping paper chaos. Oliver was more interested in the boxes and paper than the actual gifts. He crawled around on the torn wrapping paper, crinkling it in his fists and laughing at the sound. Atlas tolerated baby hands pulling his fur, small feet kicking him accidentally, and even Oliver using him to pull himself up to standing for the first time. The dog remained calm through all of it, his patience seeming endless. Sarah's father, who was visiting for the holiday, pulled out his phone and recorded Atlas and Oliver playing together. He said it was the most remarkable thing he had ever witnessed. As Oliver approached his first birthday, his personality emerged. He was curious and fearless, always exploring and getting into things he shouldn't. Sarah found herself constantly saying no and redirecting him. But Oliver listened to Atlas in ways he didn't always listen to his parents. When the dog moved to block something, Oliver would stop. When Atlas positioned himself in a certain way, Oliver understood the boundary. It was as if they had their own language that Sarah and Mark weren't fully part of. Planning Oliver's first birthday party became Sarah's project. She wanted it to be perfect. She ordered decorations with a woodland theme, featuring foxes and bears and trees. She baked a smash cake for Oliver and cupcakes for the guests. She invited family and friends, knowing their small house would be packed with people. The only thing she worried about was how Atlas would handle the crowd. The dog wasn't used to so many people in his space, and she didn't want him to feel stressed or overwhelmed. The morning of the party, Sarah talked to Atlas while she set up decorations. She explained that many people would be coming to celebrate Oliver, and she needed Atlas to be on his best behavior. The dog listened, his head tilted to one side, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand. When guests started arriving, Atlas remained calm. He greeted each person politely but quickly returned to his spot near Oliver. The baby was dressed in a little vest and bow tie sitting in his high chair, and Atlas positioned himself right beside it. When it came time for the cake smash, everyone gathered around with cameras ready. Sarah placed the small cake in front of Oliver on his high chair tray. The baby stared at it for a moment, uncertain what to do. Then he grabbed a handful and squeezed. Blue frosting oozed between his tiny fingers. He brought it to his mouth and tasted it, his eyes widening with delight. Then chaos erupted as Oliver discovered the joy of smashing cake. He slapped it with both hands, sending chunks flying. Frosting ended up in his hair, on his face, all over his clothes. And of course, plenty fell to the floor where Atlas waited patiently, cleaning up every crumb. The guests laughed and cheered. Everyone took photos and videos. But Sarah noticed something that made her heart swell. Throughout the chaos, Atlas never took his eyes off Oliver. Even while eating the dropped cake, the dog remained vigilant. When Oliver started to tip sideways in his high chair, reaching too far for a piece of cake, Atlas shifted his position to be ready if the baby fell. Mark noticed too and squeezed Sarah's hand. Their friends saw a fun party, but Sarah and Mark saw the evidence of something deeper, a bond between their son and their dog that went beyond anything they could have imagined. After the party ended and the guests left, Sarah and Mark faced the enormous mess. Wrapping paper, empty juice boxes, and cake crumbs covered every surface. Oliver had fallen asleep in Mark's arms, exhausted from all the excitement. As Mark carried the sleeping baby to his crib, Atlas followed close behind. Sarah watched them go, this little parade of her family, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She began cleaning up, but her mind wandered to all the moments that had led them here. The weeks after Oliver's birthday brought new challenges. The baby was walking now, taking wobbly steps between furniture and falling often. Each tumble made Sarah's heart jump, but Atlas seemed to anticipate them. The dog would move to cushion Oliver's falls when possible, letting the baby grab onto his fur for support. Oliver treated Atlas like a furry piece of furniture, using him to pull up to standing and sometimes even trying to climb on his back. The dog accepted it all with grace that amazed everyone who witnessed it. Sarah started taking Oliver and Atlas to the local park. There was a playground with baby swings and a sandbox. Oliver loved the swings, pumping his legs and shrieking with joy as Sarah pushed him higher. Atlas would sit directly in front of the swing, watching Oliver's face each time he swung forward. The dog learned the rhythm and timing, never flinching even when small feet came close to his head. Other parents at the park began recognizing them. They would comment on how well-behaved Atlas was and ask questions about his training. Sarah would explain that most of it was natural, that Atlas had simply decided Oliver was his responsibility. One afternoon at the park, an incident occurred that showed just how serious Atlas took his role. Oliver was playing in the sandbox when an older boy, probably around 5 years old, ran over and grabbed Oliver's toy shovel. Oliver started crying, reaching for his toy. The older boy laughed and ran away with it. Before Sarah could even stand up from the bench, Atlas was moving. The dog caught up to the boy in seconds and positioned himself in the child's path. He didn't growl or show aggression, but his size alone made the boy stop. Atlas sat down and stared at the boy until he dropped the shovel and ran back to his mother. Atlas picked up the shovel gently in his mouth, carried it back to Oliver, and dropped it in the sandbox. The baby stopped crying immediately and went back to playing. Sarah sat frozen on the bench, processing what she had just witnessed. Other parents were staring too, some with concern, others with admiration. The mother of the older boy marched over, clearly upset. She demanded to know if Atlas was dangerous and threatened to call animal control. Sarah felt her protective instincts flare. She explained calmly what had happened, pointing out that her son had been the one who took Oliver's toy. The woman sputtered but eventually walked away. Another mother approached and told Sarah not to worry. She said she had seen everything and would testify if needed that Atlas had done nothing wrong. She praised the dog's restraint and judgment. Sarah thanked her and decided it was time to leave. As they walked to the car, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how Atlas had handled the situation. The dog had defended Oliver without being aggressive, showing more emotional intelligence than many humans she knew. That evening, Sarah shared the park incident with Mark. He listened carefully, then sat on the floor with Atlas and talked to the dog seriously. He thanked Atlas for protecting Oliver and told him he was the best dog in the world. Atlas wagged his tail and licked Mark's face. From across the room where he was playing with blocks, Oliver yelled, "At," and clapped his hands. The dog immediately went to the baby's side. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look that said everything. They had worried about the wrong thing. The danger wasn't Atlas. The danger was the world outside their home, and Atlas was their son's shield against it. As fall arrived and Oliver turned 15 months old, his vocabulary expanded. He could say several words now, including mama, dada, ball, more, and of course, Atlas, which he pronounced as Attis. But the word he used most often was Attis, calling for his dog constantly throughout the day. When Oliver woke up in the morning, he would call for Atlas before his parents. When he wanted to play, he would toddle over to wherever Atlas was resting and climb on him. The dog had become Oliver's best friend and constant companion. Sarah enrolled Oliver in a parent-child music class at the community center. She thought it would be good for him to interact with other children his age. The first class went well. Oliver enjoyed the singing and the simple instruments they got to play. But when they got home and Sarah tried to tell Oliver about their day, he seemed confused. He looked around the living room and called Attis over and over. Sarah realized that Oliver had expected Atlas to be at the music class. The baby had never done any activity without his protector nearby. It made Sarah wonder if she was doing the right thing, or if Oliver was too attached to the dog. She discussed it with Mark that night after Oliver was asleep. Mark did some research on his phone and found articles about children bonding with family dogs. Everything he read said it was healthy and normal. Children who grew up with dogs often felt more secure and developed better social skills. They decided not to worry about it. If Oliver wanted Atlas nearby and Atlas wanted to be near Oliver, there was no harm in allowing it. Their bond was special, and trying to separate them would only cause unnecessary distress. The holiday season approached again, and Sarah realized how much had changed in 1 year. Last Christmas, Oliver had been a baby who could barely sit up. Now he was walking, talking, and developing a personality that amazed them daily. He was stubborn like Mark and creative like Sarah. He loved music and books. He was fearless and adventurous. And he trusted Atlas with everything. When Oliver was scared of the vacuum cleaner, he would run to Atlas and bury his face in the dog's fur. When he was tired but fighting sleep, he would curl up next to Atlas, and within minutes he would be dozing. The dog had become Oliver's safe place. Sarah decided to have a professional photographer take family photos for their Christmas cards. She found a photographer who specialized in pets and families, someone who understood how important Atlas was to their family. The photo session took place at a local park with fall leaves creating a golden backdrop. Oliver wore a tiny sweater and jeans. Atlas wore a bandana that Sarah had carefully chosen. Mark and Sarah dressed in coordinating colors. The photographer was patient, taking shot after shot, trying to get everyone looking at the camera at the same time. The best photos ended up being the ones where they weren't posed. In one, Oliver was mid-laugh, his hand reaching up to Atlas's face. The dog's expression was gentle and loving, his eyes soft as he looked down at the small boy. In another, Oliver had wandered a few feet away and Atlas was watching him intently, every muscle ready to move if needed. The photographer remarked that she had never seen such a devoted dog. She said the photos told a story of love and protection that would be treasured for generations. When the photos came back, Sarah ordered prints for everyone in the family. She framed several for their house. Her favorite showed all four of them together, with Oliver sitting between Mark and Sarah and Atlas lying in front of them. They looked like what they were, a complete family. Sarah's mother called after receiving her photo and said she kept it on her mantle. She told everyone who visited about Atlas and Oliver, completely reversing her earlier fears about having a large dog around a baby. Winter brought snow, and Oliver experienced it for the first time with wonder in his eyes. Sarah bundled him in a puffy coat, mittens, and boots that made him waddle like a little penguin. She opened the back door and Oliver took tentative steps into the white wonderland. He bent down and touched the snow, then pulled his hand back quickly, surprised by how cold it was. Atlas bounded past him, leaping into the deeper snow with pure joy. The dog loved winter, and his enthusiasm was contagious. Oliver watched Atlas play and began to laugh. He took more confident steps into the yard, trying to follow the dog. When he fell into a snowdrift, Sarah rushed forward, but Atlas got there first. The dog nudged Oliver gently with his nose, helping the baby find his footing. Soon Oliver was giggling uncontrollably, falling on purpose just to feel the soft snow. Atlas stayed close, becoming a living guardrail that prevented Oliver from wandering too far or falling too hard. Sarah stood on the porch with her phone, recording videos she knew she would treasure forever. As Oliver approached 18 months, his communication skills grew stronger. He could express what he wanted and needed using simple words and gestures. But his most consistent communication was with Atlas. The two of them seemed to have developed their own system of understanding. Oliver would point and Atlas would go investigate. Oliver would pat the floor and Atlas would lie down so the baby could use him as a pillow. Oliver would bring Atlas his favorite ball and the dog would gently take it, then drop it nearby for Oliver to retrieve. They played this game for hours sometimes, a simple back and forth that required no words. Sarah started working part-time from home. Mark's income was steady, but they needed the extra money for Oliver's future. She set up a small office in the spare bedroom with a desk and computer. Oliver would play in his room across the hall, surrounded by toys and books. Sarah worried about leaving him unsupervised even for the short periods when she needed to focus on work. But Atlas solved that problem naturally. The dog would position himself in Oliver's doorway, where he could see both the baby and Sarah. If Oliver needed something or got into anything potentially dangerous, Atlas would bark once. Sarah learned to recognize the different sounds Atlas made. One bark meant check on Oliver. Two barks meant something urgent. A low whine meant Oliver was upset. This system worked remarkably well. Sarah could take conference calls knowing that Atlas was on duty. She could type emails without constantly checking the baby monitor. Her productivity increased because she trusted Atlas completely. Her supervisor noticed the improvement and praised her work. Sarah wanted to explain that her giant German Shepherd was the reason for her success, but she worried it might sound unprofessional. Still, she knew the truth. Atlas wasn't just a pet or even just a protector. He was a partner in raising Oliver. One afternoon, while Sarah was on an important video call, she heard Atlas bark twice. Her heart jumped. She quickly muted herself and ran to Oliver's room. The baby had somehow climbed onto his changing table and was teetering on the edge. Atlas was standing right below him, positioned to break his fall. Sarah grabbed Oliver just as he started to tip. She held him close, her heart pounding, thanking Atlas over and over. The dog had saved Oliver from a serious injury. That evening, Sarah and Mark discussed whether they needed to be more careful about what furniture was in Oliver's room. But they also acknowledged that accidents could happen no matter how careful they were. Having Atlas as a backup safety system gave them peace of mind that was priceless. The neighborhood families began inviting Oliver to playdates. Sarah was hesitant at first. Oliver had never been away from Atlas for more than a couple hours, and she worried about how both of them would handle the separation. The first playdate was at a neighbor's house just 3 doors down. Sarah dropped Oliver off and explained that she would be back in an hour. Oliver went willingly, excited to play with the new toys and other children. But back at home, Atlas was a different story. The dog paced from room to room, whining softly. He checked Oliver's room repeatedly. He sat by the front door waiting. Sarah tried to comfort him, but Atlas was inconsolable. When Sarah went to pick Oliver up, Atlas insisted on coming along. The moment they arrived at the neighbor's house, Atlas calmed down. He could smell Oliver and knew his boy was safe. The neighbor opened the door and Oliver ran out, immediately going to Atlas and hugging him. Sarah realized then that the separation was hard on both of them. She decided that future playdates would need to include Atlas or be at their own house, where Atlas could at least hear Oliver playing. As spring returned and Oliver turned 20 months old, his personality was fully formed. He was talkative, active, and incredibly affectionate. He loved to hug and kiss his parents throughout the day, but his biggest displays of affection were reserved for Atlas. Oliver would throw his arms around the dog's neck and squeeze with all his might. He would kiss Atlas's face and say "love at us" in his sweet toddler voice. Atlas would sit perfectly still during these embraces, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes half closed with contentment. Mark captured these moments whenever he could, building a photo album that chronicled their bond. Sarah's social media following had grown significantly. She had started posting photos and videos of Atlas and Oliver regularly, and people from all over the world followed their story. Comments poured in from parents who had similar experiences with their dogs and children. Others shared that seeing Atlas and Oliver had convinced them to keep their dogs when they got pregnant. Some said the videos brightened their difficult days. Sarah never expected this response, but she was grateful that their story could bring joy to others. She was careful to protect Oliver's privacy, never showing his full face or sharing personal details. But the glimpses she did share resonated with thousands of people. One video in particular went viral. Sarah had filmed Oliver trying to share his lunch with Atlas. The toddler held out a piece of sandwich to the dog, who gently took it and ate it. Then Oliver tried to eat from Atlas's food bowl. Before Sarah could intervene, Atlas stepped between Oliver and the bowl, blocking access. The dog then picked up his bowl in his mouth and moved it to a higher surface where Oliver couldn't reach. The video showed Atlas's intelligence and his understanding that while he could eat Oliver's food, the reverse wasn't safe. People commented that they had never seen anything like it. Animal behavior experts chimed in saying German Shepherds were among the most intelligent breeds, but this showed exceptional reasoning. The attention was overwhelming at times. Sarah received messages from news stations wanting to interview them. Dog food companies offered sponsorships. Book publishers suggested she write about their experience. Sarah declined most of it. She didn't want their story to become a spectacle or for Oliver to grow up in the spotlight. Their bond with Atlas was personal and precious, not something to be commercialized. She continued posting occasionally because she enjoyed connecting with others, but she set firm boundaries about what she would and wouldn't do. As summer approached, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. The news brought mixed emotions. Joy at expanding their family, but also worry about how Oliver and Atlas would adjust. Oliver was still so young himself, and Atlas had devoted himself entirely to the boy. Would the dog be able to protect 2 children? Would Oliver feel jealous or replaced? Sarah discussed these concerns with Mark late into the night. They decided to handle it the same way they had with Oliver. Trust Atlas, prepare carefully, and have faith that love could expand rather than divide. Telling Oliver about the new baby was challenging since he was still so young. Sarah and Mark used simple words and let Oliver feel Sarah's growing belly. They read him books about becoming a big brother. Oliver seemed interested but didn't fully understand what was coming. Atlas, however, seemed to know immediately. The dog became extra gentle with Sarah again, just as he had during her first pregnancy. He walked carefully around her and positioned himself near her whenever she sat down. Mark noticed and marveled at the dog's intuition. Atlas always seemed to know what the family needed before they knew themselves. The months of pregnancy passed quickly while caring for an active toddler. Oliver kept Sarah busy from morning until night. He was into everything, exploring constantly, testing boundaries. Atlas remained his shadow and his safety net. When Oliver climbed too high on the furniture, Atlas would bark to alert Sarah. When Oliver ran too fast toward something dangerous, Atlas would gently block his path. The dog never hurt or scared Oliver, but he set limits that the toddler accepted better than he accepted his parents' rules. It was as if Oliver knew Atlas's corrections came from love. Sarah went into labor on a warm August evening. Oliver was at Mrs. Rodriguez's house for a sleepover, something they had practiced several times to prepare him. Atlas, however, refused to leave Sarah's side. As the contractions grew stronger, Atlas paced anxiously. He whined and nudged Sarah's hand with his nose. Mark tried to put Atlas outside, but the dog wouldn't go. Finally, Mark called Mrs. Rodriguez and asked if she could watch Atlas too. The elderly woman agreed and came over immediately. Atlas reluctantly left with her, looking back at Sarah multiple times as he was led away. Emma was born 12 hours later, a healthy baby girl with wispy blonde hair. Sarah was exhausted but overjoyed. Mark called Mrs. Rodriguez with the news and arranged for Oliver to meet his baby sister the next day. But first, they needed to bring Emma home and introduce her to Atlas. Sarah felt less worried this time. She had seen what Atlas did with Oliver. She trusted that he would extend the same protection to Emma. Still, her heart beat fast as they pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door with Atlas on his leash. The dog pulled toward the car, his tail wagging furiously. He had been restless all night, Mrs. Rodriguez reported, barely sleeping. Mark took Atlas's leash while Sarah carried Emma inside. They followed the same introduction process they had used with Oliver. Atlas approached slowly, sniffed gently, and then looked up at Sarah and Mark as if to say he understood. This tiny new person was also his to protect. He licked Emma's tiny hand and then lay down at Sarah's feet, assuming his guardian position immediately. When Oliver arrived home an hour later, the real test began. The toddler burst through the door calling for his mama and Atlas. He stopped short when he saw Sarah holding a bundle. Oliver approached cautiously, his little face scrunched in confusion. Sarah showed him Emma and explained that this was his baby sister. Oliver stared at the baby, then looked at Atlas, then back at the baby. He reached out one finger and gently touched Emma's hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around Oliver's finger reflexively, and Oliver's face broke into a huge smile. He looked at Atlas and announced, "Baby sister, Addis, baby sister." Atlas seemed to understand that his job had just doubled. In the following weeks, Sarah watched in amazement as the dog divided his attention between both children. When Emma cried, Atlas would alert Sarah if she hadn't heard. When Oliver played, Atlas kept one eye on him while staying near Emma's bassinet. The dog somehow managed to be in two places at once, or at least that's how it seemed. Friends who visited were astounded by Atlas's ability to monitor both children simultaneously. Oliver adjusted to being a big brother better than Sarah expected, largely because of Atlas. When Oliver felt jealous of the attention Emma received, he would go to Atlas for comfort. The dog would let Oliver hug him and climb on him, providing the physical affection the toddler needed. When Oliver wanted to help with the baby, Atlas would supervise, making sure Oliver was gentle. The dog had become a bridge between the siblings, helping them form their own bond. One night when Emma was 3 weeks old, she started crying inconsolably at 2 a.m. Sarah was so exhausted she could barely move. Mark had to work early and needed sleep. Sarah dragged herself out of bed to feed Emma, but the baby wouldn't settle even after eating. Sarah walked the halls, bouncing and shushing, tears of frustration running down her face. She felt like a failure as a mother. Then Atlas appeared beside her. The dog walked with her, his presence calm and reassuring. After a few minutes, Sarah sat down in the rocking chair with Emma still fussing. Atlas lay down right next to the chair and began making a low, rumbling sound, almost like purring. Emma stopped crying and turned her head toward the sound. Within minutes, she was asleep. Sarah looked down at Atlas with tears of gratitude. He had saved her again. As the weeks turned into months, a routine developed. Emma would lie on her play, mat during tummy time while Oliver played nearby with his toys. Atlas would position himself between them, watching both. If Oliver got too rough or came too close to Emma, Atlas would gently redirect him. If Emma rolled toward something unsafe, Atlas would block her with his body. Sarah could cook dinner, or fold laundry with both children in the living room because Atlas was there. The dog had become essential to the functioning of their household. Sarah's online followers grew even more when she shared that Atlas was now protecting 2 children. The photos and videos of Atlas managing both Oliver and Emma touched hearts around the world. Parents commented that they wished they had an Atlas. Dog trainers asked about his background and training, surprised to learn he had never been professionally trained for this role. It was all instinct and love. Atlas had simply decided that these children were his purpose, and he fulfilled that purpose with unwavering dedication. When Emma turned 6 months old and Oliver was approaching 3 years, Sarah reflected on their journey. She thought about all the warnings they had received about keeping Atlas when Oliver was born. She thought about the fear and doubt she had felt. And she looked at her family now. 2 beautiful children and a dog who loved them more than she thought possible. Atlas was graying around his muzzle now, showing his age. But his devotion hadn't diminished at all. He still followed the children, everywhere, still slept outside their bedroom doors at night, still lived every moment in service to their safety and happiness. Mark built a special bed for Atlas in the living room, where the dog could see both children's rooms. They bought him the best food and took him for regular vet checkups. They knew Atlas wouldn't be with them forever, and they wanted to treasure every moment. They also wanted Oliver and Emma to remember him, to understand how special their protector was. Sarah started writing down stories about Atlas and the children, creating a book she would give them when they were older. On Oliver's 3rd birthday, they had a small family party in the backyard. Oliver wore a crown and blew out candles on his cake. Emma sat in her high chair, clapping her chubby hands, and Atlas lay in the grass nearby, watching over both of them with love in his eyes. Sarah took a photo of that moment, all of them together, happy and safe. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. And Atlas would be there, their massive German shepherd, watching over his little brother and sister like the heavenly protector he had always been. The bond they shared was unbreakable, built on trust, love, and a devotion that transcended words. Atlas wasn't just a dog. He was family. He was guardian. He was everything they never knew they needed and everything they would forever be grateful to have.